With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground.
When the palace released a short, cold statement in January 2024, no one expected what would follow. But behind the clipped language was a secret so devastating that it would shake the monarchy and the world. It began, as royal statements often do, with calm precision. A planned procedure, the announcement read, for a non-cancerous abdominal condition, just enough to inform, not enough to explain. No warmth, no personal detail, just detached, clinical phrasing designed to reassure. But this time, it didn't work. The Princess of Wales, one of the most visible and beloved members of the royal family, had vanished from the public eye, and the nation was left with more questions than answers. There were no recent photographs, no smiling appearances, no word from Kate herself. For a woman whose presence had always been felt, whether through charity visits, elegant speeches, or quiet gestures of compassion, the sudden silence was alarming. And as the days turned into weeks, that silence began to speak volumes. Across the United Kingdom and beyond, royal watchers grew uneasy. Where was she? Why had the palace offered so little? And why had Prince William, so often accompanied by his radiant wife, started appearing alone, his expressions strained, his smiles hollow? Something felt wrong. The royal family is no stranger to privacy, but this was different. This wasn't quiet dignity. This felt like a cover-up. Inside the palace walls, tension hung thick. A source close to the family described the atmosphere as cold, quiet, and very serious. Even the seasoned courtiers, trained to maintain composure through scandal and crisis, whispered of unease. Staff avoided eye contact. Schedules were rearranged. Security tightened without explanation. There were murmurs of a deeper truth, one that no press release dared to confront. The absence became more pronounced as Kate missed major engagements, including Commonwealth Day and Easter services events she never would have skipped unless absolutely necessary. William, usually poised, appeared increasingly distracted. He attended the funeral of King Constantine without her, an absence that signaled to many insiders that something was deeply wrong. And yet, the palace held its line. No further details, no change in tone, just silence. The media, unable to resist the vacuum, began to fill it with theories, some wild, some oddly plausible. Was Kate in intensive care? Has something gone wrong during surgery? Was this the beginning of another royal tragedy hidden behind protocol? Every unanswered question fed into the growing anxiety. Social media ignited. Hashtags began to trend. Online communities dissected every word, every image, every absence. But the palace didn't flinch. The silence remained. It was a masterclass in deflection, and yet, for the first time in years, it seemed the royal family had lost control of the narrative. Trust began to erode. The press, typically deferential in moments of royal vulnerability, began to prod more boldly. Even seasoned royal correspondents voiced frustration. What was the palace hiding, and more importantly, why? Because deep down, the public sensed it. This wasn't about discretion, this wasn't about privacy. This was about something so personal, so painful, that even the polished machinery of monarchy couldn't hide it forever. The story was no longer about a planned surgery. It was about the cracks forming behind the palace gates, the fraying edges of a tightly controlled image. But just as the silence grew deafening, a single video would bring it crashing down, revealing the truth no one was prepared for. When Princess Kate finally reappeared, it wasn't in a palace or at a royal event. It was a quiet bench, a soft voice, and a message that left the world in tears. After weeks of suffocating silence, the nation held its breath as the screen lit up, not with fanfare, not with royal pageantry, but with something heartbreakingly human. On the 22nd of March, 2024, the Princess of Wales appeared in a short video, unlike anything the monarchy had released in recent memory. There were no guards flanking her, no titles announced, just Kate, calm, centered, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. Her voice was steady, her words carefully chosen. But it was her eyes that delivered the full weight of what was coming. And then she said it. The cancer had been there all along, hidden, quiet, and unsuspecting, discovered only after her surgery, lingering in the shadows of what had been called a non-cancerous condition. The truth landed like a gut punch, not only because of the revelation itself, but because of the raw honesty with which it was delivered. She did not speak as a future queen or a royal figurehead. She spoke as a wife who had to break her husband's heart, as a mother trying to protect her children, and as a woman grappling with a life-altering diagnosis that upended everything. There was no attempt to gloss over the pain, no ceremonial language, just the simple, human confession that she was now undergoing preventative chemotherapy, that she was doing her best to stay strong for her family, for herself, for the people who had always supported her. It was this deeply personal approach that moved the world. Millions watched in stunned silence, then erupted in an outpouring of grief, admiration, and empathy. For so long, Catherine had been seen as composed and graceful, perhaps untouchable in her elegance. But in that moment, she became something far more powerful, real. She asked for one thing in return for privacy, especially for her 3 young children. It wasn't a demand, but a plea, a mother's instinct to shield her little ones from the chaos of the spotlight. And though the world had waited desperately for answers, the tone of her request silenced even the loudest critics. People didn't just listen, they respected her wish. Behind the scenes, it became clear why this announcement had taken so long. The palace had deliberately waited. They wanted her to begin treatment quietly, without pressure or panic. They needed her to be strong enough, not just physically, but emotionally, to face the public. And she had done it on her own terms. This wasn't damage control. It was a woman reclaiming her voice, her story, and her strength. But the choice to delay the truth, while understandable, also stirred unease. Why had the public been kept in the dark? Who else in the royal circle had known and when? The video gave clarity, but it also opened new wounds. It answered the question of where Kate had been, but left others dangling painfully in the air. Most strikingly, insiders whispered that Prince William himself had not known the full extent of her condition until weeks after the surgery. That revelation would fracture more than just the palace's pristine image. It would expose how deeply this storm had shaken even the family's strongest bond. Yet even this honest moment sparked new questions, and for Prince William, the shock was only just beginning. He was her rock in public, but in private, even William didn't know the truth until weeks later. The moment Kate revealed her diagnosis to the world, hearts broke across the globe. But within the palace, the emotional fallout ran even deeper. Reports quietly surfaced that Prince William had been informed of the cancer only weeks after the surgery had taken place. It was a detail so jarring that many refused to believe it at first. How could the future king, her husband, her closest confidant, have been kept in the dark? And yet, insiders confirmed what many feared: William had been blindsided. Not out of malice, but because the palace machine had moved too fast, too methodically, and with too much fear of public reaction to allow even personal truths to flow freely within its walls. This wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a royal failure. Communication, the very core of trust, had collapsed. Behind the gilded gates, tensions rose like storm tides. Staff whispered of missteps, of advisors scrambling to contain a narrative that had already spiraled far beyond their reach. The usual polish of protocol gave way to confusion and contradiction. And as William processed the crushing reality of Kate's diagnosis, he was forced to mask his grief while the palace reeled from a second, simultaneous crisis. King Charles had also been diagnosed with cancer. It was a double blow, one that no amount of royal training could have prepared them for. The heir to the throne and the reigning monarch, both families suddenly thrust into parallel battles for survival. Behind closed doors, strategy meetings turned frantic. Advisors were caught in a tug-of-war between duty and compassion. How much should be shared with the public? How long could they maintain appearances before the truth demanded oxygen? One camp urged transparency, the other, silence. The divide became personal. Those who had once worked in harmony now avoided eye contact in corridors. Trust dissolved not only between staff, but between the royals themselves. William, caught between his loyalty to the crown and his love for his wife, found himself at odds with palace tradition. And yet, he pressed on. He appeared at events, greeted dignitaries, smiled for cameras, all while shouldering a grief no one truly understood. But the strain was showing. The public, too, began to sense the disarray. Journalists, long accustomed to royal opacity, grew bolder in their inquiries. Why had updates been so scarce? Why had William looked so haunted, so absent? Where was the empathy from the institution that claimed to value its people above all else? Across the press and social media, the demand was the same: answers. But answers did not come. Instead, the palace held its line, retreating behind carefully crafted statements that said little and revealed less. It was a dangerous game. Every day of silence only deepened suspicion. Every vague reassurance rang hollow. And at the center of it all stood William, a man pulled between public responsibility and private despair, carrying a burden that no crown could lighten. As chaos unfolded behind palace doors, Kate made a quiet decision to disappear completely. While the world searched for answers, Kate slipped out of sight, fighting a private battle the public would never see. As summer unfolded across the United Kingdom in 2024, the Princess of Wales quietly vanished. No royal visits, no speeches, no photographs. Even in the most intimate family gatherings, her absence was unmistakable, and with every missed event, every unexplained silence, the mystery only deepened. Yet behind the silence wasn't scandal. It was suffering. Kate was deep in the grips of chemotherapy, her days now shaped not by royal duties but by the grueling cycle of treatment and recovery. Tiredness consumed her, nausea lingered. Her once glossy hair thinned, and though the palace walls shielded her from the public eye, they could not protect her from the reality that her world had changed forever. Every detail of her care was cloaked in discretion. The location of treatments was guarded, the timing unannounced. Photographers were kept far away. And though the public longed for a glimpse of the woman who had once graced every headline, none came. Inside the palace, debate erupted over how much to reveal. Some advisors insisted that more transparency was necessary, and that public trust was eroding with every unanswered question. Others, fiercely protective, argued that her right to privacy outweighed everything. The result was a deadlock, and amid that uncertainty, Kate remained silent, not because she didn't care, but because she was fighting to survive. Yet even in this shadowed chapter of her life, Kate's spirit refused to fade. Though she could no longer attend engagements, she found small, intimate ways to remain connected. Letters arrived at cancer wards, bearing her signature handwritten notes, offering strength to those fighting similar battles. Her children, though shielded from the world's gaze, still heard her voice at night through bedtime stories. She was no longer the face of royal life, but she was still a mother, still a woman who refused to let illness rob her of purpose. But the cost was steep, not only for Kate, but for William. With his wife out of sight, he was forced to carry the monarchy on his own. His schedule remained relentless. Ceremonies, state visits, and high-stakes appearances, all performed under a veil of emotional exhaustion. Insiders whispered that he was growing thinner, quieter, more withdrawn. In public, he smiled. In private, he bore the weight of two roles: future king and full-time caregiver. He walked alone into rooms where she once stood beside him, and every empty space beside him was a painful reminder of what they were losing. And yet, the palace maintained its silence. Even as concern mounted and speculation boiled over, the strategy was unchanged: control the message, limit the noise. But silence, however well-intentioned, is a dangerous thing. And as the summer faded into autumn, a single error in judgment, one seemingly small mistake, would unravel the fragile calm they had fought so hard to maintain. But silence came with risk, and one mistake would soon reopen every wound. A single program listing, one name, and suddenly, the palace was back under fire. In June 2025, the Royal Ascot program was printed, distributed, and consumed by media and monarchists alike. It was one of the most anticipated social events of the royal calendar, a celebration of tradition, prestige, and pageantry. But this year, buried in the carriage procession lineup, one name stood out like a thunderclap in a quiet room: the Princess of Wales. It was the confirmation the public had been longing for. Kate was returning. Or so they thought. Within hours, headlines exploded with excitement. Social media lit up in celebration. After months of worry and speculation, the world believed Kate would finally step into the light again. But then came the silence. As the event approached, no images of preparation emerged. No subtle palace hints, no coordinated fashion buzz or leaked attendance confirmations. And then, just as swiftly as the excitement had built, the palace released a dry statement that stopped everything in its tracks. The Princess of Wales would not be attending. In fact, the listing had been a mistake. An administrative error, that's what they called it. One of the most choreographed institutions in the world had made a paperwork mistake. The public didn't buy it. What followed was a media firestorm. Questions poured in with venomous speed. How could the organizers of one of Britain's most tightly managed events accidentally include the future Queen in their published lineup? Why did it take until the eve of the event to issue a correction? And more hauntingly, was it really a mistake? Or had something changed at the last minute? Theories surged like floodwaters. Some claimed Kate had planned to appear, but backed out due to health complications. Others believed she had never agreed at all, and the palace had miscommunicated with Ascot organizers. But the damage was done. Within hours, the hashtag #WhereIsKate returned to the top of trending lists worldwide, and this time, it carried more frustration than sympathy. The public, once understanding and patient, now felt misled. Their hope had been weaponized against them, only to be stripped away again. The palace's careful strategy of silence, already criticized, was now seen as manipulative. What had been compassion began to look like control, and worse, the ghosts of past conspiracies came roaring back to life. Inside royal communications, offices, chaos reigned. Damage control was launched in every direction. Senior aides worked overtime to reassure the press, whispering vague explanations to friendly outlets. But the problem was no longer just about the princess, it was about trust. And trust, once broken, is rarely restored with words. The Royal Ascot disaster wasn't simply a scheduling misstep. It reopened a wound the palace had barely managed to close. It reignited the very doubt they had tried so hard to suppress. And it proved one painful truth. The public's faith in the institution remained fragile, barely holding on by a thread. Yet in the midst of confusion, a glimmer of hope finally broke through. She didn't need a crown or fanfare, just a simple smile and the courage to show up again. By September 2024, after months of isolation, Princess Kate completed chemotherapy. There was no grand proclamation, no royal spectacle to mark the end of her treatment. But for those who had followed her journey with quiet prayers and heavy hearts, it was a moment of silent triumph. The woman who had disappeared into the shadows re-emerged, changed, but unbroken. And when the palace announced in January 2025 that the Princess of Wales was officially in remission, the relief was palpable. Across the United Kingdom, and far beyond its borders, the news landed like a collective exhale. The battle, it seemed, had reached a turning point. But recovery, especially in the royal world, was never going to be simple. Every step toward the public eye was orchestrated with meticulous care. This was not a return to duty, it was a reintroduction to the world. Her team, working alongside doctors and advisors, carved out moments small enough to be manageable, but meaningful enough to matter. There were no long speeches, no unscripted walkabouts. Every outing was short, rehearsed, and strategic. She didn't need to say much. Her presence alone was the message. She was still here, still standing, still fighting. The Commonwealth Day service in March 2025 marked her first significant return. It wasn't just a royal obligation. It was a test of endurance, strength, and willpower. As she stepped alongside Prince William, the emotion in the air was almost tangible. The world watched her every move, not with scrutiny, but with admiration, almost reverence. But it wasn't the grand events that defined her comeback. It was the quiet, symbolic gestures that resonated the most. In June, she made another appearance during the Garter Day procession. Once again, her time was brief. The Princess of Wales didn't stay long, just 45 minutes. But it was enough to light hope in the hearts of those who had feared they'd never see her in public again. Her smile, while gentle, bore the weight of survival. There was grace in her restraint and strength in her caution. This was not a victory lap, it was a recalibration. A slow, deliberate step into a life that no longer fits the mold it once did. Everything behind the scenes remained fragile. Even the smallest engagement required careful negotiation between palace schedules and medical realities. One missed hour of rest could trigger days of exhaustion. One public wave might cost her weeks of recovery. The emotional toll was just as heavy. For Kate, returning to the world that once demanded perfection meant facing it now as a different woman. A woman who had come face to face with her mortality. And though the public saw her composure, few truly understood the cost of every appearance. But behind those quiet smiles, the reality was far more complicated and far more permanent. The crown she was born to wear no longer fits the same way, and neither does the life she once led. After months of absence, careful reemergence, and quiet resilience, it became undeniably clear. Kate Middleton's royal role had changed forever. No longer was she the ever-present symbol of poise and dependability, sweeping through hospital wards and gala halls with effortless grace. Her schedule, once packed with charity work, advocacy campaigns, and spontaneous walkabouts, was now dictated by something more powerful than protocol: her health. Every royal appearance was now subject to a question that once seemed unthinkable. Can she manage it? And if the answer was no, there would be no forced smile, no last-minute substitution. The new reality was this: if she wasn't ready, she simply wouldn't go. Behind palace gates, this shift rippled through every corridor. There were no more surprise visits to children's centers, no more long public speeches without interruption. Every engagement had to be filtered through layers of planning doctors, personal aides, and senior advisors assessing the risk, the strain, and the emotional toll. Kate was no longer just a working royal. She was a patient in remission, and the brutal honesty of that truth redefined her future. Projects she had nurtured with personal devotion, like her early childhood initiative, were either paused or passed on. Her deeply personal hands-on approach, once celebrated as the future of the monarchy, had to be scaled back. She was still passionate, still committed, but now, everything had to wait until she was well enough. There were no guarantees. And yet, what emerged from this transformation was something even more profound than resilience. For the first time, the monarchy had to make room for humanity. No longer could duty bulldoze through suffering. No longer could appearances be maintained at the cost of personal well-being. The palace, long ruled by tradition and image, was being forced to adapt not for optics, but for survival. This wasn't a pause, it was a reckoning, and Kate was the epicenter of it. For generations, senior royals have pushed through grief, illness, and scandal with barely a word. But now, a new model was taking shape, one built not on ceremonial presence, but personal strength. In quiet meetings, palace officials began crafting a health-first approach to royal engagement. Advisors now worked with Kate, not just around her. Her doctors held as much influence as her press team, and her own voice, once measured against tradition, now led every conversation about what came next. She would return when she could, and only when she chose to. It wasn't defiance, it was dignity. Still, not everyone embraced the change. Some critics whispered that the monarchy couldn't function around one person's medical chart. But those voices were quickly drowned out by the public's growing admiration. What they saw wasn't weakness, it was leadership redefined. A future queen who knew her worth, even when she wasn't visible. A royal who chose authenticity over performance. And a woman brave enough to admit that even with a crown, healing had to come first. But what happens when one royal's illness reveals cracks in the entire system? She was more than a princess. She was the monarchy's bridge to the next generation. Without her, the cracks begin to show. As Kate withdrew from public life to recover, the palace's facade held firm for a while. But behind that polished exterior, the void she left behind became impossible to ignore. Prince William, now burdened with the roles of both father and future king, was stretched dangerously thin. Once a symbol of modern royal partnership, he now appeared at events alone, his charm dimmed by exhaustion, his speeches shortened, his presence less magnetic. The contrast was jarring. The couple that had once symbolized the monarchy's steady future was no longer visible as a pair. And without her quiet strength to balance his growing responsibilities, William looked more isolated than ever. To fill the growing gap, palace strategists scrambled. Queen Camilla stepped forward, taking on a more visible presence. Princess Beatrice, until now a quiet figure on the periphery of royal duties, was nudged into a broader public role. But while both women carried titles and duties, neither held the same sway with the public. Kate's absence wasn't just logistical, it was emotional. Her presence had acted as a unifier, bridging the distance between royal tradition and modern sensibilities. And without that bridge, the divide widened. The impact was most visible among the youth. In polls conducted throughout late 2024 and early 2025, support for the monarchy among Britons aged 18 to 35 dropped sharply. Many who once saw Kate as the relatable face of royalty, the mother, the advocate, the quiet reformer, felt disconnected from a palace that now felt hollow and unfamiliar. It wasn't just her fashion or poise that they missed. It was the way she made monarchy feel human. Without her, the institution felt like a relic, trying to stay relevant in a world that demanded authenticity and transparency. Beyond Britain, cracks spread across the Commonwealth. In Australia, Jamaica, and Canada, public debates about breaking away from the monarchy grew louder. Leaders pointed to the palace's handling of Kate's illness, the secrecy, the confusion, the PR missteps, as a symptom of a system too rigid, too outdated. Once again, the silence that had been meant to protect Kate had unintended consequences. The very model of royal dignity had become a symbol of detachment, and the ripple effects were political as much as emotional. Even within the palace, the atmosphere changed. Insiders admitted that Kate's absence had disrupted everything: schedules, morale, communication. For years, she had been the quiet compass many turned to. She didn't lead with force, but with presence. Her image had become the monarchy's emotional anchor, and without it, the institution felt adrift. In private meetings, aides began whispering the unthinkable: could the monarchy continue to evolve without her at the center? The answer wasn't clear. What was clear, however, was this: the future of the monarchy could no longer rest on titles alone. It had rested on Kate's humanity, her relatability, her emotional resonance with the people. And now that she was gone from view, the palace was discovering just how fragile its foundation had become. And while the palace adapted, behind closed doors, a family struggled with something deeper. Royal titles couldn't shield them from grief. Illness didn't just change Kate, it changed everything. Inside the grand halls of Kensington and Windsor, far from the cameras and the carefully worded press releases, a different kind of battle unfolded, one that couldn't be managed by royal advisors or softened by tradition. For Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, their world had shifted in ways no child should ever have to face. Their mother was so constant, so gentle, so present, was suddenly not there. Not for school runs, not for holiday outings, not even for bedtime stories, except on the rare days when her energy allowed it. The royal nursery didn't escape the ache of absence, and neither did the quiet corners of the palace where laughter once echoed. As Kate focused entirely on recovery, Prince William was forced to become two people at once: the public figure expected to stand tall, and the private father trying to hold his family together. He dressed for state dinners, then rushed home to read bedtime stories. He gave speeches to dignitaries while quietly carrying school bags. And he did it all without complaint, but not without cost. In a rare and emotional admission, William later described the last year as the hardest year of my life. It wasn't a line crafted for public sympathy, it was a glimpse of raw truth from a man who had tried to be everything to everyone and still felt like he was failing at something. But Kate's decision to step back, to put health and family above expectation, became something far more than personal. It was revolutionary. For centuries, royal women have shouldered duty no matter the cost, appearing poised even when breaking inside. Kate changed that. By choosing to disappear when the world demanded visibility, by placing her children above the crown, she rewrote the definition of royal motherhood. She showed the world that queens can be vulnerable. That strength isn't always in standing tall, but sometimes in lying low and letting others lead when you can't. And the world noticed. Public opinion, once skeptical about palace secrecy, began to shift. As the months unfolded, the narrative changed from confusion to compassion. People no longer wanted polished statements, they wanted truth. And in Kate's silence, in her gradual return, they saw a quiet kind of bravery that couldn't be choreographed. For many, it was the first time royalty felt real. The tiaras, the titles, the pageantry, all faded against the image of a mother choosing survival over tradition. Still, the future remains uncertain. Will Kate return fully, reclaiming her position as the monarchy's steady star? Will she fade permanently into a private role, emerging only when her strength allows? Or will she carve out a new path entirely, one defined not by duty, but by choice? The answers, like her journey, remain unknown. But what's clear is that the royal family will never be the same again. Illness stripped away the illusion of invincibility, and what's left raw, exposed, human is something far more powerful than tradition ever offered. And so the question remains, can a royal family built on tradition survive a world that demands vulnerability? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.